Welcome back to the Godly Impact podcast. Hey, I'm going to just start at the beginning. If you haven't subscribed yet, whether you are watching by the video podcast or you are listening by audio, hit that subscribe button and then share this with some friends. This is transformative information. And certainly you have some people in your life that are committed to growth just like you are, and give them something that can help them. And also, the side benefit is it's going to give you something to talk about that has meaningful conversations. Hey, are you familiar with the term gaslight or gaslighting? Well, that phrase seems to have been experiencing something of a revival in our culture. Do you know where that phrase came from? It actually came from a movie, a 1944 movie that was a psychological thriller, and it starred Ingrid Bergman as well as some other people, and Charles Boyer as in that classical movie. I have seen the movie. It is a very good movie in my opinion, and it follows this couple who have moved into this house, and this young woman, played by Ingrid Bergman, begins to experience these strange occurrences that happen, one of which is flickering gas lights. And things begin to go missing, and there's different noises. And what's happening is her husband, who has a criminal background and is trying to get her inheritance. And I just realized I am so sorry if this is like a spoiler. Okay, you know what? The movie is still worth watching. Okay. But what is happening is he's trying to convince her that she is insane. And gaslighting is real. It's not just something that happened in a movie at one point. We can end up in situations and in relationships where there is someone who is trying to make you think something different than what reality is. Somebody is trying to convince you of a false reality. Now, I don't have any research to back this up. And if you follow me at all, you will know that one of the things I am not a male basher. I'm the mom of 5 grown sons. One of the things that I do a lot of research on and I speak on is about the state of men and boys in the U.S. and also within Western culture, but primarily here in the United States. Because if you look at the quality of life measurements, the state of men and boys in our culture is not good. And it's not just because they're male and they're dumb and they bring it all on themselves. There's a lot of factors to that. So anytime that I make a statement that is more of a categorical statement about men or women, there's a couple of things to realize. And one is I'm making a general statement. I am not making a statement about every single person who is male or is female. There are tendencies that the two genders have that we are wise to be aware of. And it's not like, well, men are the ones with the problems, and if they just got it together like us women, well, we would all, have nothing but unicorns and rainbows and, cupcakes with chocolate sprinkles. That is not true. That doesn't align with the truth of the world or the Bible at all. All of us, no matter whether we are male or female, are very much in need of salvation and redemption and of transformation. But I think in a general way that men do use gaslighting in a more common tactic than women. Women have their own things that they use that men don't tend to use nearly as much, all right? So we'll probably talk about that in the future. But when it comes to gaslighting, this does seem to be something that more women are on the end of experiencing than men. Because I think that a lot of times women have more of a tendency in their life, early in their life, to start asking, what's wrong with me? And men tend to start from the other end, which is pretty much what's wrong with you. And as people grow, then sometimes those two questions become reversed, and they become reversed in a good way, because there are times that women need to start asking, I don't think this is all me. I think that there might be something going on with you. And as men grow, one of the things that they need to do is to start saying, maybe this isn't all you, and maybe there's something I need to work on. But the person I want to talk to today is the person who consistently is talking herself out of the stories that she tells herself. So we've been in this series, It's All in Your Head, because the stories that we tell ourselves are so vitally important. Because what have I been saying? Our stories become our beliefs become our actions become our nature, and our nature becomes our impact. And there are real opportunities and resources and relationships that are at stake for these stories that we are telling ourselves about ourselves and about someone else or about an entire group of people. But one of these specific things that can happen is there are women, and I'm sure that there are men out there too. So if you happen to be listening and fall in this category, it does happen to men as well. But since I'm a woman and I'm more familiar with being able to know with some of the struggles that women have, I'm going to primarily be talking to the woman today who is consistently talking herself out of her story. You see, there's a difference between interrogating your story and talking yourself out of one. The first one is motivated by humility. And I have talked in these episodes about the importance of interrogating our stories. I talked at length about that in the last episode. We have the responsibility to interrogate our own stories, to try to prove ourselves wrong, not just to show up in the life, with the attitude of, well, this is what I think, and if you don't want me to think it, then you better prove me wrong. Okay, that is not a mature approach to life. It's, okay, this is my story. I have a responsibility to look at it from another perspective, from several other perspectives, to see, is there something different here than just this immediate story that I'm telling myself? So we do have that responsibility, but there's a difference between doing that, because that's motivated by humility. It's just motivated by the fact that I could be wrong. But the second one is motivated by fear. You see, when we're rightly interrogating our stories, we're owning the fact that we could be wrong, but we're not afraid of being right. I want to make that very clear. When we are rightly interrogating our stories, we are owning the fact that we could be wrong, but we're also not afraid of being right. We're prepared to deal with our story if it turns out that that negative story is actually true. It's actually factual. But when we start talking ourselves out of our stories, we're hiding. We're trying to hide from an undesirable consequence. We're afraid of facing something if our story does turn out to be true. Now, that doesn't mean that in the first example, that if we have a story and we're handling it correctly, that we're not going to have any concern whatsoever. I mean, if we're in a marriage, for example, and we have a story that says, I think my spouse is being unfaithful to me, I think they are betraying me, and we rightly interrogate that story, and then we bring that forward and we own our ask and all those kind of things. I'm not saying that it's like if the story turns out to be right that we're going to be like, oh, well, okay, well, glad to know I was right. Huh, okay. I mean, obviously not. Of course, there would be some fear associated with that. I mean, some pains. I mean, there would be some real negative emotions associated with that. But we would still have a commitment to be dealing with reality. Whereas when we start we're just going to talk ourselves out of our stories, and that's how we're going to deal with anything that's negative. That is when we are being driven by fear. You see, there's a very big difference in life between having fear and being motivated and driven by fear. I can be motivated to do what is courageous and what needs to be done and feel very afraid, but courage, or the commitment to do what is right, is still motivating me, not fear. Fear never motivates us into a courageous direction. It can motivate us in a lot of other directions, but not in a courageous direction towards what is healthy, towards what is good, towards what is right. But fear will always end up motivating us in those directions in some way or another. If you recognize that you've had a history, that you have a pattern of having stories come up that you're afraid of interrogating, or maybe you interrogate, and you do go so far as even presenting those stories, like we talked about last time, of owning the ask, trying to find out, is this story true or is it not? But maybe even when you get the response to that story, whether it's gaslighting or it's something else, then you back down, you back away. You talk yourself out of it. You minimize the story. If you find that those are things that you are doing or you think you've been doing, then how do you change that? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're probably going to need a new set of eyes, an objective set of eyes. And I'm just going to tell you, okay, this can be hard to come by. The stock answer is go find a counselor. And I am all about good counseling. Here's just the truth. Just because somebody's a counselor doesn't make them a good counselor. And I don't just mean that makes them a bad counselor. It might just be that they're not qualified to be able to help you. It might be they're not a good fit for you. They might be a great fit for somebody else, that has different issues, but that doesn't make them a great fit for you. Because at the end of the day, counselors are just people. They have their own perspectives, their own mindsets, their own values. They have their own stuff going on in life. And so don't just, what I advise people when to go to counseling is first interview your counselor. I mean, ask them some questions to find out about their perspective and not just about their training in a formal kind of way, but find out about their perspective. Find out about how they have dealt with or have they dealt with situations that are similar to yours before. How often, how frequently, how recently. If you're going to sit down and you are going to ask someone for help in your life, then part of being responsible with that is making sure that, hey, before I sit down and I spend 4 sessions or 10 sessions pouring out my heart to somebody and telling them all this information about me, it's a good thing to be able to find out something about them before you do that. So I do understand that sometimes it's just easy for me to sit here and say, yep, you need to go find an objective set of eyes. And I know from my own experience that that is not always easy to come by, but don't despair with that. There's a difference between looking for someone who's just going to tell you what you want to hear and looking for someone who can be objective. And if you're the woman whose history and tendency is more to talk yourself out of any kind of negative story, you are at risk for being in, whether it's with a lay counselor, a friend, or whether it's with a lay counselor or a formal counselor, you can be at risk for allowing somebody else to talk you out of what you think needs to happen. Okay. So again, there's this tension that has to be navigated here, and that is having the humility to recognize, okay, I don't really handle this well, but at the same time, don't throw yourself under the bus and say you've got nothing. Pay attention to what really resonates with you. So just some real practical tips. If you are in this situation and you're looking for somebody that can be that objective, set of eyes, then a couple of things that you can look for. And again, this is whether it's a friend, a family member, it's a paid, trained formal counselor, or whoever it is, pastor, whoever, is that will they ask you probing questions? Or do they just take your word for things and then they just go with that? Because a faithful friend will ask you probing questions. They will probably suspect that maybe there's some things that you haven't put on the table because you don't want to be embarrassed about yourself, or you don't want to make somebody else look bad. And so they're going to ask for some probing questions. The other thing that they're going to do is they're going to ask questions before they make a conclusion. Okay, there's a difference between somebody reaching a conclusion and then they start asking questions because they're just trying to stockpile evidence to support that conclusion, and someone asking questions so that they're in this data gathering process so they can gain information, and from that they can reach some conclusions. But even with those individuals, are they willing to interrogate their story? Are they willing to have you interrogate their story? Do they get defensive if you come back and say, well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Well, I kind of have a different perspective. If somebody gets defensive, it's like, well, whatever. That's probably a red flag. But if they invite you into a conversation to say, well, explain that to me. Tell me why you feel that way. Then that is the hallmark of a person who wants to engage in a mature way and to know what's the accuracy. We're looking for accurate information here and for wisdom. So what do we do with that? Well, again, we listen. If somebody else is presenting their story, we do listen to it. If we are on the listening end of that, somebody's presenting that, then we also confirm that what we have understood is correct. We see the need behind the story. And this applies not just when we're listening to other people, but we need to see the need behind our own stories. What's the story that I'm telling myself? Is it indicating that there's a need for clarity, for direction, for security, for affirmation? There's a need behind every one of those kinds of stories. So we go through all of the other things. We own the ask. When we seek for understanding, we listen or respond with openness, with kindness and compassion. We allow time for the other person to process. We don't demand immediate acceptance of what we've said or zero frustration from the other part. But if you're also in this last category of a person who's been in the practice of talking yourself out of your stories, you haven't been owning the ask. You haven't been asking the hard questions. You haven't been paying attention to your gut. Remember, we talked about guts a few episodes back, and that physiologically, we actually have a connection between our brain and our gut. And there is something that when we feel like, well, it just didn't set well with me. Well, my gut didn't feel right. I don't know. That is because emotionally, our gut is actually wired to that part of our brain, that intuitive part of our brain that says, I think something feels a little off here. So pay attention to your gut. Again, there's a difference between saying, okay, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to use this as one more piece of information that I'm putting in this pile as I'm putting this puzzle together, and then taking whatever we feel at some moment and like, that's all we need. Okay, because you know what? I mean, too much pizza, too much chocolate, too much broccoli, whatever. I mean, that can kind of mess with your gut. So we don't give our gut the final say, but we do give it a say. So if you're in this process of recognizing, I have been talking myself out of my stories for a long time. We want to be committed to facing reality, whether our stories are happy ones or not. Now, if we face a story that is very unhappy for us, that doesn't mean that we just start cutting people out of our lives left and right. Yeah, I mean, as people, we just have this tendency to be like on the pendulum of a clock. And if we've been used to being over here, on the left side for most of our lives, then the tendency is that we overcorrect and we go over here to the right side. We don't want to do that. We want to aim for the middle, all right? And so what we might need to do is go, I've been talking myself out of my stories, and this person, they're really not a good friend. My spouse really doesn't treat me with dignity and respect. My kid really is taking advantage of me. My boss really is just leading me on and continuing to promise me things, promotions that he's never going to deliver on. When we face those stories, that doesn't mean we just start cutting people out of our lives left and right. There is a place for grace. But what we want to remember about grace is this. Grace is always there as an opportunity for transformation. Grace is not an open door for continuing in destructive behavior. Those are two entirely different things. So if you recognize, I've been talking myself out of these stories for a long time because I've been afraid of what would happen if I found out it was true. Remember this, you are not called to live a life of fear. Absolutely, as a Christian, we are not called to walk in fear. Now, I know from my own experience, that might mean that you're going to have some hard things to walk through. It might mean that life doesn't go at all the way that you had hoped or planned or thought it would. But I can absolutely tell you this. We are hardwired to walk in the freedom that Christ has set us free in. And we are not called to live in a spirit of fear, because that kind of fear does not come from God. We are called to walk with power, with love, with a sound mind, not talking ourselves out of our stories, because that does not lead to a sound mind. We are called to walk with power, not fear, with love, not retaliation, and with a sound mind. We align our thinking with what is real. We don't try to live in la la land or fantasy land because it's easier, or because we're afraid of what's going to happen if we move into reality world. Because la la land, fantasy land, you can live there for a while. You might even be able to live there for a long time, but I'll guarantee you the cost of living there is going to be high, and not just for you, but for other people in your life. And eventually it ends up being very costly for the person or people who's on the other side of that. So this is going to wrap up this series on It's All in Your Head. I want to invite you, if you haven't already, visit the website, stephaniepresents.com. Sign up for the Godly Impact newsletter. You can also check out speaking engagements that I have there. I do welcome custom topics, although I never speak on something that I'm not qualified and prepared for. But I love being able to travel and to share and to see women and parents equipped and empowered to do what? To take their good intentions and to grow them into a godly impact, so that we can have lives and we can raise kids who are spiritually strong, who are emotionally healthy, and who are relationally smart. Thanks for joining. I'll see you next time.